Okay, hi everyone, welcome to today's parent and carer information session run by me, Naomi Reed, and I'm a speech and language therapist. So today we're going to be carrying on from what we covered last month, which was things to do with using visuals at home. So ways of helping a child who has a learning disability understand what we're saying to them. So that was things like visual timetables. And today we're going to look a little bit more at the kind of world of different types of visuals and alternative ways of talking. And we're going to look at things that help children who have a learning disability communicate with us and things that can support them with their communication needs. Okay, so I'll start the PowerPoint. Ooh. Okay, so today we're going to look specifically at aided language displays and communication books. And just so in terms of acronyms that come along, so aided language displays can be shortened to ALDs, and communication books will be just called communication books. So these two strategies, aided language displays and communication books, both come in the umbrella of AAC, which is alternative and augmentative communication, but I'll come on to explain that in more detail. So we're going to look at what they are, why we use them, what it looks like when we use them, and how we use them. So AAC, so something might have come across this acronym before, but AAC is alternative and augmentative communication, which is a really long way of saying any strategy that replaces, so that's where the alternative word is in there, or helps, which is what the augmentative word means, with spoken communication. So this is a big kind of summary of what we call total communication. So last month we looked at things in the top left hand corner, so the visuals, things like now and next, things like objects of reference and symbol boards and things like that. Then in the lower right hand corner we've got things which we class as AAC. So in the top left hand corner, the visuals, these are the things that we use to talk to a person who has a learning disability. These are the things that we use to support them with their difficulties in understanding spoken language. And then in the bottom right hand corner we have AAC, and these are strategies that we use to help the person with learning disability communicate back with us again. It helps them with their expressive communication. It helps them with their talking, because most people with a learning disability will have some kind of difficulty with talking and using spoken language. So in the AAC corner we can see a kind of symbol grid at the top, and that's an aided language display. At the bottom there's a communication book. We've also got PECs. We've got Makaton, so Makaton signing, and we've also got above Makaton there, in the green case, there's a tablet, which is a high-tech communication aid, which is similar to an aided language display or a communication book, but it's digital. And generally the way it works is that the person presses a symbol and it speaks for them, so it has a kind of spoken element. And it also means that a high-tech aid is generally used when someone has used aided language displays and they've used a communication book and they have too many symbols to be able to carry around with them. So it's got to the point where they have too much to say and it can't be covered by something you could carry around in a communication book. So in that case we make it digital and we can have lots and lots and lots of pages, and it also has the voice output element to it as well. Okay, so just to conclude, so visuals, so the things we talked about last month, things like visual timetables, objects of reference, is how we speak to a young person with learning disabilities, and AAC is how they speak back with us. So we do get a lot of kind of teachers and families who say, you know, I don't really need to put an AAC strategy in place. Don't really need to use symbols for them to talk to us, like an aided language display or communication book or PECs, because I can always tell what they want, or we all understand her anyway, or you can just predict what they want. So I came across this really interesting story from an AAC user. So this was someone who wasn't able to communicate verbally, and their AAC, so their symbol system for however they used to support their communication needs wasn't with them. And this is a situation they came across. So this is when I was 17 years old. I started to live in a residential home. I slept in a room with 6 other people. From there, a bus took me to school every morning. Before we got up, a sister, so this is obviously a kind of a church school, a sister would come around to give us our medication. One morning, she was in a rush. She left my bed neighbour's tablets on a locker beside my bed. So the person who sleeps next to, on the bed along from this person, their medication was also put next to this person's bed. When a nurse gave me my breakfast, so this is a different person, she gave me those tablets as well. I tried to say, no, that's wrong with my face, but she didn't understand. So it says about my bed neighbour. So the person who sleeps in the bed next to him has really strong medication because he was very aggressive and would threaten to break things. In the morning rush, I couldn't tell anyone about the mistake that the sister and the nurse had made. At school, I started to feel very tired and I fell asleep. My teacher noticed that I turned pale. She didn't know what was wrong. I was rushed to hospital and my pulse apparently was hardly noticeable. So that's a situation there where someone was not able to convey something that turned out to be a kind of life and death situation. And if you'll just bear with me, I've got another video that I'll show you as well about the power of communication strategies. Okay, I'm just going to load it up for you. And I'll just share this video. Please let me know for some reason if the video isn't working or if the sound isn't working. Please just unmute yourself and say.
Hi. Wait. More. I wait more.
Well, John, you've told me quite a story. Why don't you hit speak display so everybody can hear the whole story? Thank you.
It was time to eat. I wait and wait. No one there. No one comes. I'm afraid no one here will help me eat. I wait more. He come and say to me, you don't tell. He brag at me. He go away. I wait more.
Well, I'm glad you could tell me about it. Is there something you need me to do to fix it? You can take care of it yourself. Excellent.
So that's a kind of really powerful example of someone having AAC, so that's alternative and augmentative communication. And in that man's situation, he had a high-tech voice output communication aid, and he was able to kind of explain to people. But it's the same for any sort of symbol-based communication aid or any sort of AAC, whether it's signing, whether it's an aided language display, communication book, or a high-tech aid. It's really, really important that person who has any kind of communication difficulty is given the tools to communicate to their potential, because obviously these things can be life and death. And also a lot of the children who you are parents for, that are cared for, are incredibly vulnerable and need to be able to speak up for themselves and explain things. And in that video, the transcript talked a lot about core vocabulary, so it's called The Power of Core, but I'll come on to that. I'll explain what we mean by core and core vocabulary. Okay, so there we've got a medication example there, and we've watched the video about the man being able to report the incident of abuse that he suffered. So communication is a basic human right, and functional communication saves lives, as we've seen. So another reason why sometimes people might be reluctant to use an AAC system, so to start using to start using aided language displays or using communication books, is that it takes time and it takes a lot of effort from the parent and carer and the education staff and all the communication partners of that person with learning disability to get it up and running. And again, you kind of hear, well, that person can point, or they can just look at stuff, or they just lead me to something and I know what they mean. But there's so many other reasons to communicate that aren't just asking for something. And I know the words here are absolutely tiny, so I really apologise for this, especially if you're trying to watch it on a small screen. But it's just a diagram of all sorts of different ways and reasons why we communicate. So I'll just quickly go through and just summarise it basically. So the first one is to share information. So it's got things like expressing your opinion or your emotion, ideas, naming things, giving an answer and commenting. Another reason why we communicate is social etiquettes. You might want to join in with social things. So express gratitude, greet someone and say goodbye, and use manners. We might want to express our wants and needs. So we might need to indicate that we're uncomfortable. We might need to request an action. We might need to request help. We might need to be able to request a person or an object. And another really important one that often is, and that's also expressing hopes and dreams, and also protesting and rejecting. Another really important one that's often not thought about is internal dialogue. If a person doesn't have enough practice at communicating, it can be harder and harder to have that internal dialogue. So things like self-regulation. So if you're annoyed or if you feel ill or you feel tired, often you can kind of talk to yourself, can't you? So, okay, well, I feel really tired now, but I'll have a cup of tea in a bit, and then after work I'll have a lie down, and maybe I'll cancel that thing for later. Or if you're kind of worried about something, you can kind of talk through the situation logically and think, actually, no, it's not going to be that scary, or maybe I'll ask someone for help, all those sorts of things. So like problem solving, moral reasoning, remembering, all those sorts of things are things that we talk to ourselves about, and we need access to communication strategies to help us to develop that, and it really helps our well-being and our regulation. And then the other, obviously there's an infinite reasons why we communicate, but on this infographic, the other reason why we communicate is to create social closeness. And this is probably the most important one, isn't it? The most important reason why we communicate with people. So it's kind of tell a story. So tell a funny story about something that happened, tell a pretend story for entertainment, telling jokes, asking questions, having conversations, starting a conversation, keeping a conversation going, and ending a conversation. So there's loads and loads of reasons why we communicate. So, and this is why it's so important to have robust strategies and AAC, so those alternative and augmentative communication strategies, such as aided language displays and communication books that can help a child to communicate in lots of different ways. Because obviously it's really good to be able to ask for things, it's great to be able to engage in learning at school, but most of all, it's just really, really good for our well-being and our mental health to be able to connect with other people. And it's also, as you saw before, it's literally our human right. And it will support the children that we are parents and carers for to advocate for themselves and be able to protest things that they don't want, to make sure that we can reduce their vulnerability. Okay, so what does AAC look like? So this is a range of communication strategies. So on the left, we've got Makaton. So you may have come across Makaton signing, which is the same signs as are used on Mr. Tumble or Singing Hands, if you've ever come across those. There's also aided language displays, which we'll talk about in more detail. And in the video with the man talking about the incident of abuse in his care home, he was using core words, and the aided language display on the bottom left is full of core words, and we'll come on to why those are important. And there's a kind of medical health chart aided language display as well above that, which is a lot more complicated. The next two pictures along are communication books. So there's loads of different types of communication books. We are going to talk about the one at the top, the one which on the left has a yellow page and on the right has a green page. So these are the main ones that we're going to talk about today, and they're the main ones that get recommended, but there are all sorts of different ones depending on the what we call access methods of the children that we're parents and carers for. And the next one along is PECS. So you may have come across Picture Exchange Communication System, and this is a system where a child has lots of different symbols in a book, and they work up to being able to place those symbols on a sentence strip, which is across the bottom of the book, and exchanging it with a person. So that's why it's called Picture Exchange Communication System. So today we're just going to talk about aided language displays and communication books, just because they're the two strategies that are basically suitable for all children. So if a child is using PECS, we would generally recommend they also use an aided language display alongside, and that eventually they start to move on to using a communication book. So that's why I'm kind of focus on those two things. And again, if we think about all the different reasons in the previous infographic for why a young person with a learning disability might need to communicate, PECS is fairly limited, because generally you just ask for a thing, whereas there's lots of other types of things that we want to teach them to be able to communicate. And ways and functions to communicate. Okay, so we're going to start off with aided language displays. And we're going to talk about the fact that a lot of aided language displays have the same language in them, which is called core vocabulary. So the symbols and words on this aided language display are what we're talking about when we talk about core vocabulary. So it's words that we use all the time and for lots of different conversations. There's a different type of vocabulary called fringe vocabulary, sometimes called topic vocabulary, and these would be, so for example, at snack time, you might use some fringe or topic vocabulary, which would be the specific vocabulary for that conversation that you're going to have, which would be, it would be squash, orange juice, yogurt, what's its, toast, all those sorts of things that all the really specific words for that conversation. Yet we would always prioritise core vocabulary, so you would at least have that alongside, because we can use these words in every single conversation. So these are things like I, you, good, bad, different, want, more, like, help, hurt, look, stop, choose, play, think, next, now, oh no, to kind of express something, turn for my turn, your turn, no for negatives, finish, go, and then some questions, who, what and where. And there's often different types of core, different ranges of core vocabulary, but this is a good kind of sample here. And the reason why we use core vocabulary is that 80% of our conversation vocabulary that we use in our conversations is core vocabulary. It's actually very rare that we use fringe or topic vocabulary. So I'll stop sharing the screen just in case there's anyone who has any comments at all. Okay, so I'll just tell you about a study that a speech and language therapist carried out. So she had two young children, I think they were 2 and 4, and she took them to the zoo, and just for that day she jotted down all the different things that they said. I think she maybe recorded them on her phone and kind of jotted them down on a piece of paper. And before they went to the zoo, she thought, well, what are the kind of things they're going to say? They're probably going to say things like tiger, monkey, fish in the aquarium. They're probably going to say, Coca-Cola for when they go to the cafe, all these sorts of things. And then at the end of the day, she had a look at all the different things that her children had said, and the ratio of 80% of vocabulary being core vocabulary and 20% being core topic vocabulary held up. So she noticed actually when they went to the monkey enclosure, they hardly ever said monkey. They were saying, look, wow, oh, again, he's doing it again. Can you see that? Oh, and those sorts of core things. When they go to the cafe, they were saying, I want that, look at that one, more of this one again, please. It was all this kind of core vocabulary that they used rather than just the single time they said Coca-Cola or sandwich. So that's why when we have an aided language display, we try to have most of the words being core vocabulary, because you might look at it and go, oh, well, how am I going to use that for snack? Whereas actually asking for more, saying I want, saying choose, all these sorts of things are really, really useful for every type of conversation. So this is why we have core vocabulary. And again, the video at the beginning with the man who was reporting the incident of abuse at his care home, he was able to explain what had happened using all core vocabulary, and it was quite obvious what he was talking about. He was able to get his point across. Okay. So I've got an example here of going to a cafe. So imagine you go to a cafe. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to make it go whole screen. Oh, yeah, okay. So imagine you go to a cafe with your friend who has communication difficulties, or your child who has communication difficulties, or even if you have communication difficulties. And you think, right then, before we go to the cafe, I'm going to make an aided language display, and I'm going to maybe make it look like this. So it's got all the different things that I might want to order, all the different drinks, the foods, the objects there, you know, chairs, spoons, plates, knives, forks, table, the toilet, maybe a couple of things like order, money, and menu. But the problem is that once you've sat down and you've, so maybe a waiter has come over and you've said sandwich, tea, maybe you said order, sandwich, tea, or pointed to the menu or pointed to the toilet to ask where the toilet is. After that, you've kind of run out of things to say, really. You know, you can't really have much of a conversation with your friend after you've just asked for, done some basic requesting. Whereas if we had a core vocabulary aided language display, perhaps paired with just the menu, so you could point to things on your core words and then things on the menu. You could order really easily, couldn't you? You could say I want and then point to English breakfast tea, or you could point to what and then the sipping chocolate or something like that to ask, what is that? And you could point to more think, to say, oh, I need to think, I need some more time for thinking, and that kind of thing. And then finish thinking, I finished thinking about it, I want to order now. There's lots of different kinds of things you could ask for and things you could talk about. And then once you've got your food, you can have a chat with your friend. So you can use your core symbols to say, I don't like this tea. Can I have another one? What are you going to have? That looks nice. You can have all those social conversations just by using core vocabulary. And also this means that you don't have to carry around or make a new aided language display or take new symbols for every new activity. You can have the most communication opportunities, but with the least amount of resources, basically. So a core vocabulary aided language display is one of the key things that in your communication toolkit. It's one of the absolute building blocks of using AAC, alternative and augmentative communication. Excuse me. So you can see some other examples of aided language displays. These ones, I would prefer that there's more core vocabulary on them, but you can see how these ones always have 2 rows of core vocabulary and then the 3 rows of fringe or topic vocabulary. So this is one for bubbles and then toilet. And a reason why I like these ones is that they have lots and lots of action words and lots of describing words, because again, it's easy just to put objects on there, whereas actually in order to link sentences together, in order to say more complex things, you need the action words. So if you're talking about bubbles, you might want to say, blow bubbles, open the bubbles, catch the bubbles, pop the bubbles. Then also describing words as well. So, big bubbles, little bubbles, this is fun, all those sorts of things. And again, there's a really useful one there for using the toilet to help your child kind of learn the vocabulary for using a toilet. And of course, aided language displays can be used both ways. When I say that, as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, about aided language displays, about visuals being the way that we talk to a person with learning disability and AAC being the way they talk back to us, it's actually not that black and white. AAC, we can use both ways. We can use this to talk to them, to help them understand what we're saying, and in doing that we teach them how to use it to talk back to us again. And this is something called modelling, which I'll come on to in more detail. But there's some examples of it, different aided language displays. And for everyone on the invite list, I'll send obviously the recording of this presentation, but I also send you some aided language displays just to see which ones you'd like. Okay, so now we're going to move on to communication books. So I will just mention as well that aided language displays are sometimes called core boards. That's a slightly more sort of American English speech language pathology term. So if you ever hear core boards, that might be the same thing as an aided language display. Okay, so I'll just check at the moment if there's anyone who has any questions at all. Great, and if you do have any questions or comments, you can always put something in the chat as well, that's fine. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. So we've talked about, so I'm just going to quickly, apologies for quickly going through all the slides. So we're looking at total communication. Last month we talked about visuals, which is the way that we talk to a person who has a learning disability to help them to understand us. And then this week we're talking about AAC, alternative and augmentative communication, which is at the bottom right hand corner. And these are ways that we can, these are strategies that we can provide to help the person with learning disability talk to us. So talk back to us. It helps. It's a person who has any difficulties with spoken language and using spoken language, and pretty much most people with a learning disability will have some difficulty with their spoken language. And today we're specifically looking at aided language displays, and we're looking at communication books. We can see them in a bit more detail here. So we've got Makaton signing today and PECs as well, but today we're talking about aided language displays and communication books. So as you can see, kind of from comparing these pictures, a communication book is essentially, the most basic way of describing it is a book of aided language displays, and we'll come on to it and we'll have a look at it. Communication books. So as you can see, core vocabulary is always included. So we've talked about how important it is to have core vocabulary, and that is always included. There is a huge range of different communication books out there. This is probably the most kind of basic one because it's quite easy to understand. The templates are quite easy to send around. If you've got Communicate in print, it's quite an easy one to kind of make and start using. But there's other communication books, and some are called POD, and there's different ones made by different kind of AAC companies as well. And we also have different communication books according to the person with learning disabilities access method. And just really, really briefly, that is mostly a person will point to symbols, whereas some people struggle with their motor skills. So they might not point, and they might actually look with their eyes or have somebody else point, and they might indicate when to stop when they've got to the right symbol and things like that. But for today, we're just going to talk about these communication books, and the layout is designed by the ACE Centre, and that's ACE, ACE Centre. And they're designed by, I think, a speech therapist, and her name is Claire Latham. So they're sometimes called the Claire Latham Design Communication Book or the ACE Centre Communication Book. So as you can see, these communication books have, so in fact, I'll show you using my communication book. So I've got an example one here. This is quite an old one, and unfortunately, being a speech and language therapist, you don't really get enough time to make the resources that you'd like to make. So ideally, this communication book would also have tabs coming out the side for each of the different topics. So this is a very kind of basic one. But the main feature of a communication book is that it should always have on one side core vocabulary, as we've talked about, and it should be the same core vocabulary on every page. So as I turn the page, as you can, oh, great, well that's an anomaly. That's one where I've clearly printed it out wrong. As you can see, the core vocabulary is the same on every page. There it is. And then on the right-hand page over here, we've got different sets of fringe and topic vocabulary. So I've got one here for places. See, I've got one there for socialising, got one there for kind of body parts and talking about your health, maybe you might be poorly or in pain. And then another example there is people. But we always have core vocabulary ready, because obviously it's really, really useful for every type of conversation. And also it's really useful for linking sentences together and for developing language in a person with learning disability. So for example, this is a people page. So I might be, excuse me, I might be answering a question. So someone might say, oh, who are you seeing later? So I might say, I see friend. So I'm going to see my friend. Or I might say, I go see friend. So there's lots of different types of things I could say. Or I could say, you know, I, oh, I'm not used to this layout. So I might say, I want to see head teacher, for example, if I need to kind of complain about something or say something. Or I might say, I am, what do we have finished on here? So I not see speech and language therapist. So you might be saying, oh, I'm not going to see the speech and language therapist today. So you can see with core vocabulary, there's lots and lots of different ways that I can use this fringe or topic vocabulary. Okay, so let's go back and have a look at more details about a communication book. Okay, so you've seen how the core vocabulary always stays on one page, and it's always included and the kind of reasons why. Okay, so here you can see different levels of complexity when it comes to communication books. And apologies, I should have made these pictures bigger so they're a bit more clear. But there's a kind of, I think this is a sort of level 3 basic one. There's different stages of communication, but your speech and language therapist will kind of take care of which stage your child needs. But just so you can see, there's lots of different layers. So the one at the bottom here is a bit more simple, and the one here is a bit more complicated. And including things like, this one has things like go forward, go back, whoops, I made a mistake, I need to go back to the index page. And the main thing that increases as they get more and more complicated is that there's more and more core vocabulary, because the core vocabulary is basically it's the most useful element of the communication book. And you even get ones with a big fold out page with loads and loads of core and symbols. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to think about, so we've looked at what an aided language display is. We've looked at core vocabulary and why we use it so often. And we've also looked at there's different types of communication books and what a communication book layout should be. So the next question is, how do we start to introduce an aided language display or a communication book to a young child? And basically, the evidence base is that we have to teach it in the same way that we teach spoken language. A person with learning disability, their learning of how to use symbols in an aided language display or a communication book should be the same way as they learn to speak, to use spoken language. But the issue is that when we're using symbols, it can feel a bit more false, and it's a bit difficult to work out, how do I teach this in a natural way? And the answer is modelling. So the modelling is a kind of speech and language therapy jargon word, which basically means demonstrating. It's the same thing. So we basically model, we demonstrate how we want to support the person with learning disability to use the symbols themselves. And and it's a similar thing to if we have a young child, so maybe we've got a newborn baby, you need to model language to them for sometimes 12, 18, 24 months before they start using language back with us again. So for example, on the you have a newborn baby, no one ever says to the newborn baby, oh, hello, how are you going to be a talker? No? Okay. And then obviously the newborn baby doesn't reply, and no one says, oh well, they're not a talker, let's not bother talking to them ever again. Instead, you talk to them day in, day out, month after month after month, until eventually around the ages of sort of 18 to 24 months, they might start talking back to you. And hopefully it won't take as long, but it's a similar thing with teaching a child how to use AAC, so an alternative or an augmentative communication strategy. We have to first use it with them. and teach them how to use it and how to value it. And also, if we're using the communication strategy to them, they learn to value it as well. They learn that actually it's not just me being expected to use this, everyone around me uses this, so I'm going to join in as well. Okay, so I've got a quick video to show you about this, so I'll just load it up.
My name is Ariel.
Apologies, I'll just get to the end of the adverts, then we'll start. Okay, as ever, please let me know if for some reason you can't hear the sound. There we go. I hope I hope that video worked okay. So that's a really nice video, and it's from I think the Worcester Paediatric Speech and Language service that we kind of like to steal every now and again because it's a really, really good video, I think. So some of the things that were covered in that video are the fact that before a child who doesn't have any learning disability and can speak verbally, for them to start to use a word, we need to hear it 500 times. So that obviously includes us. Every word that we say, we heard it 500 times at least before we started to say it ourselves. There's some really nice strategies for how to use it as well. So so after you've modelled some symbols to a child, always leave a pause, because they may actually use it back with us again. And if they don't, it doesn't matter. We give them the opportunity. And if they don't, that's fine. We just carry on modelling. Try and use it for things that are really motivating, because obviously you're going to be more likely to have a go at communicating if it's something motivating. And the other one is trying not to ask lots of questions. And this is, as I said, this is the same theory for how a child uses kind of picks up and starts to use spoken language naturally. So these are all the same things that we talk to any parent. So we may have a parent of a child who doesn't have a learning disability but has a language delay. These are all the same things that we say to them. These are the same things that we get our health visitors to tell all new parents. Try not to ask too many questions. So instead of, you know, like, come on then, what do you want? What do you want? Or even, can you point to stop, point to like, point to this. And in the same way as when children are younger, we're saying, go on, say this, or say, you know, read, you know, tell the nursery rhyme, sing the song. They often get really annoyed and stop wanting to communicate. And also, it's not a naturalistic way of communicating either. And I'll come along a little bit further in the training about how to use strategies that kind of entice and really motivate children to want to talk back with us and use their communication. And the other thing in the video was making sure that the AAC, so whatever you're using, whether it's an aided language display or a communication book, making sure these things are always available. I actually have one. Oh, I don't actually have it with me, but I've normally got one on the back of my clipboard, which I always carry around with me, so I'm ready to model on the clipboard and see if a child wants to use it back with me. So that's always a really useful thing, to have it kind of always around. Okay, let's go back to our presentation. So so modelling is a really, really good way of supporting a child to learn how to use the symbols and then start to use it back with us, and it mirrors natural language learning. Okay, and we're actually going to watch another video, so I'll just load that up for you. Okay. So this one, without being too prejudiced, this one is very, very American. So the lady's voice is very, very high pitched, and I apologise for this from the beginning. But this is really interesting. So this is a lady who's using an aided language display. She's got one in her bag that she folds out. But also the little girl that she's modelling to and supporting to use symbols actually has her own aided language display on a bracelet on her wrist, which is really neat. So I quite like this one. But you'll see in this video an example of someone who is modelling. So they're using the symbols in order to teach the young girl, the little girl with learning disability, how she could use the symbols herself. So again, please let me know if the video doesn't work or if the sound doesn't work, etc. I do apologise. That lady's voice is so high pitched. It always kind of puts my teeth on edge, but it's a really nice video. So you can see that little girl is already used to having symbols modelled to her because she's quite familiar with them. Straight away she's able to point to bubbles to request, but all the way through the therapist is modelling back to her, and there are a few opportunities where she could have modelled a bit more. I do think she could have modelled "you want to blow" and help and things like that. She could have pointed a little bit more, but it's quite a nice example. And I've sent this video out with the resources, so you can always watch it afterwards, and it goes on for about 4 minutes, and there's lots of really good examples of the lady modelling lots of things. And there's just one more video I'd like to show you, just because it's really good fun, and I think this teacher is really fantastic. It's just a really short video. I'll just get it loaded up for you. Okay, I'll just get rid of the advert.
Thumbs up. Today is gonna be a good day. Okay. Are you ready? Guess what? Guess what? We got something. But we do not know what in it. Ken, wait a second. Wait. Oh, what do I have? Stop! What did we get? I cannot imagine. What should I do? Slap! I should break it open. You think I should break it open? You think I should open it? And should I take out whatever is inside? Ooh, it's so exciting. Got the Kabina down. You want to listen? Go sit down. I'll bring you some. Me. Okay, you bring me too. What could it be? What could it be?
It's a shame with that video we never get to find out what's in the bag, which is very annoying. Oh, sorry everyone. Oh, sorry, YouTube's carrying on. Yeah, very annoying that we don't get to find out what's in the bag. But I thought that's a lovely example of a different type. She's basically got an enormous aided language display, and it's so big she has to use a wheelie chair to go back and forth and a big stick to use it. But I thought that's really, really lovely, and she's really got her whole class are really, really interested. For the reason of, in our last month's training session, we talked about the fact that visuals are something that is kind of solid and it's concrete and it stays where it is. Whereas if that teacher, even though she's really engaging, she's obviously a really fun person, the children love to listen to her, if she'd have said all of that, each word as she said it would have disappeared. Because it takes a lot of skill and a high cognitive level to be able to hold on to all the words in your auditory memory, put them all together, work out the vocabulary and the grammar, and then process what does that word actually mean. It takes a really, really high cognitive skill to do that. And of course, a lot of people with a learning disability just don't have that, and also have poor concentration for various reasons. So having the symbols there and the visuals really helps to keep someone's attention, excuse me, and helps them to kind of understand what's happening as well. So that's another example. So that's looking at modelling. Okay, I'll just go back to our presentation. Okay, right then, so we've thought about how we start to introduce AAC, so an alternative, an aided language display or a communication book. And now we're going to look at how, so through modelling, and we're also going to think about how we can support a child or a person with learning disability to use it through a strategy called Sabotage or Communicative Temptations. So it often used to be called Sabotage, but it does sound like a bit of a mean thing to do, so people tend to call it Communicative Temptations these days. But I will send, I've got quite a nice handout to do with this, and I think in that one they call it Gentle Sabotage and Communicative Temptations. So obviously, so if you see either of those terms, it basically means the same thing. So this is an alternative to asking questions or asking a child to repeat a word, because it can often feel, when we have a child who with a parent or carer for, who isn't developing, typically maybe isn't developing their talking, you might think, well, I want to get them to talk, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them lots of questions for them to answer, or I'll just ask them to repeat lots of words. And as we've talked about, asking children a question and asking them to repeat words is not really a true way of learning language. So for example, a child might kind of learn the word through repeating it, but actually doesn't learn how to use it socially or in a conversation. And also children who are questioned a lot can often feel under a lot of pressure. It might make them give up, it might make them kind of not want to join in with conversations. So using sabotage techniques, or communicative temptations as they're often called, is a kind of really functional way of doing this that mirrors natural language learning. Just going to see what I got. There we go. So some examples of sabotage are, so we saw in the video that the from the American speech and language therapist, she had a bag and she wasn't just going to open it straight away and go, oh yeah, I know that you like bubbles and I know you like cars, here you can have all these things. Instead, you know, she kept the bag closed, so the girl had to choose something. After blowing some bubbles, she put the lid back on to then see if the girl wanted to say kind of more or stop, those sorts of things. So some other examples of sabotage techniques are maybe giving a child, you know, their pot of yogurt, but not giving them their spoon straight away, maybe holding on to it and just leaving a pause, just to see if they will ask for it in any way. And with sabotage and communicative temptations, we always want to strike the balance between challenging the child just a little bit, just to give them an opportunity to communicate and ask what they want. And we also accept any way that the child communicates. So if we kind of give them the yogurt and we're holding onto their spoon, they might look up and look at the spoon, or they might point at the spoon, or they might make a noise as they're pointing. Or, you know, they might point on their aided language display and say, point to I want, and point to the spoon, which would be absolutely amazing. But whichever way they want to communicate, we just respond to them and say, oh, yeah, you know, and you then add on extra communication. So I'll just explain what I want. So, for example, I've given a child a yogurt spot and I'm holding the spoon. And if they just look at it and I leave a pause to see what they'll do in that moment, and they look at it, I might say, oh, there's the spoon. And I might say the word lots and lots of times. I might use the Makaton sign. If they've got a communication book, I might point to it in their communication book and then hand it to them and say, oh, there's your spoon. Oh, you're eating your yogurt with your spoon. That's a little spoon, isn't it? It's your red spoon. And I might say the words lots and lots and lots of times. Because if we give the child an opportunity and we leave a pause for them to be able to request, however they communicate with us is their skill at that time, at that moment. So we want to respond to however they communicate with us and then demonstrate the next step up, which would be maybe using a single word, pointing to a symbol, using the Makaton sign, that kind of thing. There's lots and lots of other ways of looking at sabotage. And if you think about the teacher as well, who had her enormous aided language display behind her in her classroom, she was using quite a lot of sabotage techniques as well, wasn't she? Rather than like, oh, we've got something new, let's open the bag, I'm going to show you what it is. She did lots of like, oh, what could it be? And shaking it and feeling it and listening to it. And it meant that the children were, you know, one little girl said, oh, I want to listen to it, and then all the other children said, oh, I want to listen to it, I want to listen to it. So she was leaving lots of pauses and making the activity really exciting so that all the children had an opportunity to ask things about it and join in and communicate. And then she was modelling back to them, which was really lovely. And I'll send a handout as well afterwards about other types of ways that we can use sabotage or communicative temptations to help the children that we're parents or carers of to communicate more with us, but in a natural way and also in a kind of low pressure way as well. Okay. So yes, so we've got sabotage and communicative temptations. Another key thing to remember when kind of introducing AAC is that it should always be available. So the last thing we ever want is to, so for example, sometimes we might go to the classroom and say, you know, does this child use AAC? And they say, oh no, well they use a textbook, or they use an aided language display. And then you look around and say, well, where is it? And so, oh, well, it's in the drawer because we don't, you know, we don't want it to get dirty, we don't want it to get ripped. We always want to see if a child has an aided language display or a communication book of any kind, we want to see that it's got dirty, we want to see, you know, it's got custard on it, you know, maybe it's got rained on, you know, that's when we know that AAC has been used really, really well. It's definitely something that we want out all the time, because if you think about a child who's learning to speak normally, if we you know, didn't allow them to talk, or if we put, you know, sellotape over their mouth or something, and then so, you know, the only time when you need to talk is snack time, you know, for example, that's when a communication book might come out, then we'll take the sellotape off your mouth, you can tell us something, but all the other times we'll put it back on and you know, you're not allowed to talk. Essentially, that's what we're doing when we put a child's AAC, you know, on a shelf or in a drawer, or kind of leave it somewhere that's out of reach for them. Their AAC should always be available. And then another strategy to do with AAC is an idea of presuming competence. And this sounds a bit strange, but when we say presume competence, we want to always basically don't be too scared of using AAC that maybe looks a little bit complicated, because again, if you think about a newborn baby who learns to, without learning disability, who learns to use verbal language naturally, every single day they are surrounded by, you know, the TV, the radio, adults having conversations around them. They're exposed to so much communication. And obviously when we address them one-to-one, we might simplify the way we talk, but they still manage to talk, they still manage to kind of swim their way through all that complexity. And it's a similar thing with AAC. It can be tempting to say, well, they, you know, I think, you know, they're not really pointing to any pictures yet, so let's just give them 1 or 2 pictures on a page. Whereas actually, if we give them more pictures and we model lots and lots of different symbols to them, if you think about a child needing to hear a word 500 times before they start to use it, it's a similar thing. We just need them to see the symbols being modelled as much as possible, and they will be taking it in. And your speech and language therapist will always be able to advise exactly which level of complexity to work on. And another element of presuming competence is that the child or young person is always ready to communicate, even if a child isn't communicating intentionally yet, and that's something we cover in the intensive interaction parent-carer session. There'll be one of those coming up in January. Even if they're not communicating intentionally yet, the way they will learn to do that is through other people interpreting their communication and modelling back to them. We can come on to that in more detail in next month's session. But this is just to point out that sometimes you might be recommended an aided language display or a communication book for your child that's maybe, from their speech and language therapist, from their teacher, and you might look at it and you might think that's too complicated. I don't know how they'll understand all of that. But the most important thing we can do is to give them lots and lots of opportunity to learn. And your speech and language therapist can always make that judgment. We always, we don't want something that's really, really complicated and overwhelming, but actually the right level for the child often looks, quite full on, like there's going to be lots of symbols. But don't worry, that has been taken into account, and there's an evidence base behind it. Okay. So just some ideas about where to start. It can seem really overwhelming when it seems like there's lots of different types of communication strategies to help a child with learning disability start to communicate with us. And what I would recommend is starting with an aided language display. And again, there's different levels of aided language displays, which your teacher or your speech and language therapist can help you to look at. And I'll just show you an example. So I've got an aided language display here. And this has got, oh no, I'm going to have to do some maths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, oh, 5. So there's 25 symbols on here. And again, your speech and language therapist or your teacher will be able to recommend how many symbols you'll need for your child. Generally, I would always just go straight ahead with this one. But with some children, it may be a little bit too much. So what we do is we go down a level and we basically take some out. So it's exactly the same, but there's just a few that are taken out. So the child starts to use this one and we model it to them, and they start to even learn where the layout is. So they know that I is up here, and they know that what is down there, for example. They know that look and see are up there. The reason why these look different is because this one has the blank line here is filled with some fringe vocabulary. That's the only reason why they look a little bit different. Otherwise, they're exactly the same, just with some taken out in this one. And as the child starts to become more confident with these core vocabulary, we can introduce this one, which basically fills in the gaps. So all the ones they already know are in exactly the same places. They can remember where they are, but there's just a few more things that we can start modelling to them, and then they might start to use. A good place to start is you can either go straight away with this 25 core vocabulary one, or this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. This one has 15 symbols on, obviously excluding the fringe ones here. And I'll send both of these out with all the resources, and you can think about where to start. So what you can do is you can just start modelling the core straight away, or you could even fill in this line with some fringe or topic vocabulary. And the one here is snack. So we've got snack, drink, water, eat, drink. So you could say like, oh, I think you want the drink, or oh, you're looking at the snack. Shall we have a look at what we want to eat? Shall we see what we want to eat? Or, you're drinking the water, you're eating your snack. We can talk to them about those different things. And I'll show you an example of that on the slides. And again, don't worry too much if you don't have fancy symbol software. You could just draw some things. If you've got an aided language display printed and laminated, you can just use either a permanent marker or a whiteboard marker, which is even more useful because you can wipe things off afterwards. You could just hand draw some things in the corner. So for example, if you wanted to have snack, we've got food, we've got drink, we've got drinking, eating, and a smiley face that might mean yum yum yum. So you can start using the core vocabulary, and if you want some extras, you can kind of hand draw in some things into the blank line. You can fill in some fringe or topic vocabulary, remembering Don't just put in objects, we also want to put in actions, and we want to put in adjectives as well. So things like eating and drinking and yum yum, those kinds of things. And we can just look for something that's motivating for the child, and whatever you would normally talk to them about, just continue talking to them, but see if you can point to some of the core vocabulary. So you might say, oh, you seem to be really enjoying your gingerbread man. So you might point to you like gingerbread man, or the child might be looking at the drink on the other side of the table. So you might say, oh, I think you are looking at the drink. I think you want the drink. Should we get some more drink? There you go. And before you know it, you realise how much core vocabulary you use when you're talking, and how much you can point to when you're modelling to the child or young person that you're a parent or carer for. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation today. And the only other thing I just really quickly wanted to show you was something I put together recently, which was a kind of health aided language display. So it's got some core vocabulary on this side, and then some fringe vocabulary to do with health. So it's got thirsty, hungry, sick, ache, toilet, and we've got wee and poo as well. And then also a visual for a pain chart as well. So it's got kind of 5 and a person crying, all the way up to light green and a person smiling, which would suggest, they're not in pain. And then there's a body outline as well, so they could point to their head and then point to, the kind of sad face to show that something hurts. Or they could use their core vocabulary. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, I'm getting really confused. Here we go. They could use their core vocabulary to say, I ache. Then they could point to their head, and it's another way of kind of adding lots of words together. And in every communication book I make, I always try to include, and even when we start with aided language displays, always try and have a health one there, because for a person with learning disability to be able to express how they're feeling, particularly things to do with their health, is really, really important, and important that we start modelling that as soon as possible. So that was the only other resource I wanted to show you. Okay, so next month we have another parent and carer information session, and that's going to be on intensive interaction, but I'll send out all the resources to do with that and all the dates to do with that as well. So I'll stop the recording here.